One of my absolute favorite activities to do when I'm not actually doing business analysis is to speak to other business analysts about their experiences and to see what there is that I can personally learn. And as part of these live sessions, I've been working very hard to invite some folks on that have a lot of experience just to kind of hear their points of view on certain issues. Today, I am happy to announce that we have two very experienced analysts that are going to be joining us. I'd like to welcome Linda Parker and Julia Newell to the show. Welcome to you both. I'm going to let the folks know ahead of time that this is a live session and we're going to be keeping an eye on the chat as we go through and answering any of the questions that they have. But before we get into any of that, thank you both for taking the time to spend with us here today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to dive right into the conversation. I'm going to leave a couple of links for the folks out there to figure out where they can find out more about yourselves and to connect with you on LinkedIn here. But part of the reason why I wanted to have you on today was to see if we could have some conversations about our experiences as business analysts. And I want to start off really just kind of by hearing your take on what it means to have a business analyst life.
Do you want me to go first, Julia?
Yes.
So I've been a BA for a long time now, over 30 years. When I started in the industry, there wasn't really, certainly in the UK, there wasn't really a defined role of a BA. It sort of came about later. I mean, when you started out as an analyst, you kind of were a bit of the sort of people who did all sorts of things. You did systems analysis, you did data analysis. It's only a bit later in my career that the roles started to split. But I think I had a slightly different journey from Julia, who did other things at the start. I knew that I wanted to go into IT, and I knew I wasn't really in the realms of being a developer or a programmer or an architect or anyone. So I wanted to be much more on that business focus side. So I actually started out in my career as a data analyst doing entity relationship modeling, that kind of thing. And then I morphed into business analysis quite early on. And I think what I like most about it and what I've loved throughout my career is the fact that it combines that sort of aspect of being involved with people and being involved with business and understanding what people need from that kind of IT spectrum. And that's where kind of most of it kind of happens. But then you realize the nuances of being a business analyst means that you might not even be developing an IT system. You might be just understanding the needs of a business and understanding their procedural aspects in order to help make process improvements. So there's so many elements to it, and also the role has so many different parts to it. So if you ask any single BA, or you get a group of BAs in a room and you ask them to define their role, you'll have hundreds of different definitions to it. And that's because there are so many aspects to it. You can be very strategic, right down to very detailed, and none of them are wrong. They're just all different nuances of the role, and it just makes it completely fascinating. So you can be in the role for many years and still learn every single day. So, you know, although I've been in the role for 30 years, I still feel that I learn almost every day something new, which is great. That's why I love it. I'm a total nerd.
Yeah, and there's so many follow-up questions that I could have on almost every aspect of what you just said. But before we get into that, Julia, how about yourself?
Yes. Oh, thank you for having me. Yes, Linda and I have had very different career paths. I actually started out my working career as a fine art restorer and conservator, would you believe? I didn't get the support or maybe the right guidance when I left school. So I went off to university to do a history of art degree instead. And I thought I'd landed on my feet getting a job as a fine art restorer, but it just wasn't to be. And I think this is where I maybe started learning these valuable transferable skills to become a BA. I then went into human resources instead. I did a postgrad diploma doing that, and that got me my first job within a banking side of things. But it was an IT analyst. So like Linda was saying, I don't think there was such a thing as a BA even 20 or so years ago in the UK. But spending time doing that, getting to understand project land, project management. And again, it was building up that confidence, how to reach out to people, how to find out who your friends are when you need to know an answer to things. And that was probably learned very, very early on in my career. But I've had different kinds of roles. So process improvement analyst was another one, before becoming a BA, if you like. But I've worked also in not-for-profit for an end-of-life charity. And I've also worked in utilities for an electricity power company. So all of these different experiences, I think, have contributed to just confidence and learning how to meet different people, how to work with different people. And I suppose that's shaped who I am. And as my husband always says, he's very jealous of me now. I am now doing a career I love doing, but it's certainly not one I predicted I would have when I left university.
That is excellent. And again, many follow-up questions, because I think you and I, career-wise, have some touch points, some commonalities between our two careers. But I think you like to describe your career path as a little bit more squiggly. Is that right?
Squiggly, such a good word. Yes.
It is a good word. And I think it's a perfect illustration of how folks that come into this profession can come out of so many different directions, right? Linda, I think with yourself, you've probably come into this, I would say it's probably safe to say, from a bit more of a technical background, because you've started really kind of on the entity modeling side, which really is pretty deep in the system design world.
Yeah.
Julia, yourself, you're a little bit, like you said, squiggly, but I mean, you've worked in HR, you've started your career in a place where it is completely different from where you are today. I would say the question I think I would ask both of you is, throughout each of your career trajectories, what would you say is the one characteristic or trait that you have that's really contributed the most to your success?
For me, I think it's probably it's mostly the softer skills. And I think when we say softer skills, it's totally the wrong word for them, because it almost puts them down. I know I can think of one person in the UK that hates them being called that.
Mm-hmm.
And she's quite right, really, because it minimizes them. But it's those skills that are inherent in us that allows us to empathize, that allows us to build rapport with people, that allows us to fundamentally go up to someone and ask them questions. I mean, the whole role of a BA is to be able to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that thing that is about emotional intelligence. You have to have a lot of emotional intelligence, so that you can go up to someone and just start to pull out key information. Because fundamentally what our job is about is about going up to people and getting information out of them. When you do requirements analysis, it starts with asking the right question, getting information out of a subject matter expert before you can even take that information and analyze those requirements. So if you've got that inherent emotional intelligence to do all of that, then you can take that away and you can do your process modeling, you can do your requirements analysis, you can perform all of the other techniques. And all of those techniques can be learned. You have to have a little bit of the ability to be able to finesse those and do those, but it fundamentally starts with those skills to be able to do it. And I think if you go into any big organization, and you even go into the business, you can usually spot people who you know would make really good BAs. I've been to loads of stakeholder meetings and just gone, that person would make a brilliant BA because they just have that something that fundamentally is about their emotional intelligence, that means they can be with people and pull the best out of them. And I think that you can't really learn, you just sort of have. I think it matures, not necessarily with age, but just with experience. So I don't think it's an age thing, it's an experience thing. Certainly, I would say that I've fundamentally got better at being a BA as I've gained more and more experience, and more different experiences. But I think that's what I would say is my biggest thing.
Right, right. How about yourself, Julia?
Gosh, I mean, Linda's just summed it up so eloquently there. Yes, I'd completely agree that I think one of the most significant traits is to be that people person, being comfortable in your own skin. And like you say, being able to talk to people, because that is really what we're doing. We're trying to get stakeholders on our side. We're trying to get that buy-in constantly. And if you can't get that, then really you're on a failing, I would have said. But it's also, I think, Rahul, one of the messages popped up there, learning. Again, that's such an important feature of it as well. And it's not necessarily that, well, it is technical learning, but at the same time, it's not. It is life learning, like Linda's saying. It's about experience and maturity in everything that you do and constantly applying it to new situations as well. So that no day is ever the same. And again, it goes back to what you're saying earlier, Linda, no BA can ever have the same role definition because we're all dealing with different situations and dealing with it slightly differently. But there will be some common traits that go through that as well. Things like understanding cognitive bias, understanding how to manipulate people a little bit. You can learn things like that. But again, once you've mastered that, other people won't even know what you're trying to do to them to get them on your side.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I had a conversation with one of my old managers last week. And one of the questions I asked him was if he had the choice between a really technical analyst who's very strong with the technology side versus if he had the choice between that type of a person and a person who had the people skills. I said, which one of those would you choose and why? And I think the common thread between that conversation and this conversation is that I think we all have a very clear idea that the people skills are critical, because his answer to that was, I would choose the person who's good with people, but can learn the technology really quickly. Would you say that does that match up with your preference of a person that you would want to have on your team as well, or would it be the other way around?
Oh, absolutely.
I agree with Julia. I think the person, so it's the person with the people skills who also has an ability and, I suppose most importantly, a willingness to carry on learning. I mean, that there's a big caveat there with a willingness to keep learning, because I mean, if we take us three, you've got 17 years experience, I've got 30 years, Julia's got 20 years plus. If we had that attitude that we were rocks and didn't want to learn anymore, then it doesn't matter how good our people skills are or our technical skills, then we're kind of not really any use to anyone, because we're never going to move forward from this point onwards. But because we've got the attitude that we're sponges and we'll soak up any learning from anyone, doesn't matter if they're more experienced from us or less experienced, if we act as sponges and keep soaking up that learning, we're always going to improve, and we're always going to be beneficial to someone else, because we're always prepared to learn something or readjust our existing knowledge, because no one ever has all the answers. You can always be proven wrong as well. So just keep moving forward, act like a sponge, learn. That's important as well. So,
You know, that is such an interesting comment, because I have been forcefully humbled in my career multiple times. I'll share my experiences with you, and I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you've experienced this at all, or what you've done to avoid what I've experienced. Okay, so I'm formally trained and educated as a business analyst. My undergrad, my post-diploma, master's degree, everything is in business and systems analysis and architecture. I remember that when I finished my formal education, I had all the confidence in the world. I walked into my first job thinking, I know it all. And 2 years after that point, my confidence was completely shattered, because what I had been taught in school and how things happen in school was right. It wasn't wrong, but how things worked in the real world for me was an educational experience in itself, because the pressures of having to deliver under timelines never existed in my education. The I want to say budget constraints, organizational politics, for lack of a better word, working with people as a team instead of having to work on your own. Combination of all of these factors really, it stressed me out to a point where it made me realize that there's a certain type of learning you can do with books and with training and with education. And then there is real world learning, which will, regardless of how much confidence or ego you have, it will humble you to a point where you realize, hey, your confidence maybe isn't real confidence. But it was only after I hit that point in my own career where I started to actually develop real confidence, because I had to kind of hit a little bit of rock bottom in my own career, skills wise, confidence wise, to say, okay, now I understand how things work. I don't know if you've experienced that in your own careers at all, or if you haven't, how did you escape that shattering of your own confidence, for lack of a better way of saying it?
I'll take that first, Linda, if you like. Well, that's very honest of you, Emma, to share your experiences like that. And I think everybody will experience it. And that goes back to what Linda was saying earlier about how it's experience, not necessarily age, that shapes and creates us. If I look back to my early 20-something self, I'm nothing like the same person I am now. Because, like you say, experience and confidence, the knocks, the setbacks, but that's what builds you. It builds character, and it makes you learn not to do certain things that way again. I was speaking to a BA in my chapter the other day. He's changed career, used to be a branch manager, he's now become a BA. And in conversation about requirements, he's like, but how did you know that? And I was like, I've worked on a previous project where we've come across that. And, there are just certain things that stick in your mind, and you know that you're going to learn again. Other things you will have to learn for the first time, like when you join a completely new sector or industry, you have to learn. And like what Linda was saying, the willingness to learn, you've got to see the bigger picture sometimes and not just be completely siloed or focused on your own initiative. And that helps broaden your mind. But I suppose it's a shame that if you've had those experiences from the university college side, that they didn't quite prepare you for working in the outside world. I suppose I must have gone through that, having not come through that walk. The squiggly career didn't allow that. But you just deal with it. And maybe that's another trait of being a BA. It's the resilience to just dust yourself off, learn, store it away somewhere and just get back on it again. That's all.
Yeah, I think June is right. You just sort of learn to pick yourself up and move on from those letdowns. I think if you've gone through a career where you haven't experienced a kind of knock in your confidence, then you probably are not doing the job correctly, because we're dealing with so many unpredictable aspects to what we do. I mean, we're dealing with people and they're inherently unpredictable. We're unpredictable. We have a bad day, so we're not quite as buoyant with our stakeholders. So, you know, that's just the way it is. You hit one stakeholder one day and they're brilliant, and then you go on for a couple of weeks and you think, oh, this is going really smoothly, and then you get to review the final set of requirements and they're like really grumpy and they don't like anything that you've done and they give you a really bad review, and then suddenly your confidence is in tatters on the floor. That happens to all of us, and so we've all suffered that, and we just kind of are resilient. That's all part of our emotional intelligence and helps us move on. So I think the key thing is to keep learning from it, understand that it's not you. And the other thing that's coming out a lot more recently with things like agile techniques and so on, that I absolutely love, is the sort of ability or the recognition of failures. So culturally, we've all been brought up that success is the only thing that's great and applaud success. But in the projects where I've worked on agile projects, in the sort of Friday review or the 2-week review, they applaud successes and they applaud when you recognize failures as well, because, you know, we shouldn't be hiding failures away. We should just applaud that we've recognized the failure, brush ourselves off, have a giggle over it and move on, so that we're not getting ashamed of the failures that happen. We just, as a group, pick ourselves up and move on. And that's what we should do as BAs.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very powerful message. And part of the reason why I've kind of overcome the instinct, you know, I think there is a lot of pressure for folks to stay overly positive. And in what tends to happen in that, when a lot of experienced folks speak, is that a lot of the pitfalls of the career can kind of remain pitfalls. And I've tried to overcome my instincts to talk about the more difficult aspects of my own career, for the sole purpose of making sure that the folks that are going through it now realize that this is a natural part of the process, right? It's hard for me. It's very, very hard for me to publicly admit that I've had my confidence totally shattered. But I think it's such an important point to get through to folks, because there are a lot of folks that are starting their careers now, and they may be very stressed out in their jobs. And I always think to myself that this, to me, it's a natural part of the process. And so I think I'll continue to share that. And I love the fact that you all, I think, recognize that this is something that we just need to kind of power through. We need to realize that mistakes happen. If it's a mistake on your part, if you've been on a failed project, sometimes it is, these are things that just happen. The most important thing in my mind, the most important takeaway that I've had from my own experiences personally, is that it's not necessarily the fact that you've made a mistake, but the fact that it's how you've responded to that mistake, which matters even more, right?
Yeah.
How have you, in your own career, experienced specific instances where you've had to pick yourselves up in situations like that?
Yeah, plenty of times. I mean, if I've made an absolute mistake and I've got requirements wrong or missed requirements and they've gone further into development, all you can do is put your hands up and admit the mistake. And then invariably what happens is that in your mind, you build up the mistake to be much bigger than anyone else does. It could be a big mistake, but what I've tended to find is when I've admitted it, someone else comes back, the project manager, the developer, the architect, and they're like, I missed it too. As a team, we missed it. It's not your mistake. It's all of our mistake. So let's just move on. We'll go back to the stakeholder. We'll collectively get it sorted out and we'll move on together. So nothing is ever really just down to you. The first stage is just kind of getting it out there, admitting it, and just moving on as a group. And the other thing with anything where you feel like, in the situation with you, having just come out of university or college, is talk to other people. Remember, we're BAs, and BAs come as a group. We love being together with other BAs. So, you know, it's always good to find yourself a mentor. Julia has been a brilliant mentor to other people. Get yourself a mentor and, you know, work with other people, other BAs, other people in your team. It helped you through the difficult times.
Yeah.
You've stolen the words out my mouth. Sorry, Imal. I was going to say the same. When you were talking about powering through by yourself, you're not alone. I think that is the wonderful thing about the BA community, that there are always other people, whether it's at your own work or externally as well. And the great thing about social media is obviously things like this, where we're reaching across huge continents to talk to each other. But even locally, there'll be meetups, there'll be events, there's webinars, there's all sorts of things. And then you build up those relationships within a community, and it's a safe space to talk to other people as well. Within my own work, we've got a small chapter. We're part of a larger community of practice. It's always good to be able to share those different examples and find out, how did other people cope and what did they do as well.
I think that's so important. And I think maybe a lot of up and coming professionals don't necessarily have the vantage point that a lot of experienced folks have. I think that most professionals hit a certain point in their career where they realize that they've kind of mastered the profession and are looking to take the next step in their own careers. And oftentimes that next step in their own careers means helping the next generation build their own careers. And part of the reason why I wanted to reach out to you is because I saw that you have the BA Life conference that you're putting together, where you're actually putting together a lot of these types of conversations for the next generation of analysts. I'm wondering if you can tell me what inspired you to start this conference.
Well, Julia and I both volunteer for the IIBA in Scotland. So we're both part of we both started out as part of the Scotland chapter, and within the UK, Julia's moved on to be one of the directors within the UK chapter. So so within that, we do a lot of volunteering anyway, with monthly sessions and so on. And then a few years ago, I was lucky enough to win the BA of the Year in the UK, which was completely amazing. And there's a big, fantastic conference down south every year. But within Scotland, there isn't really a conference. So we decided to hold a conference, just a very small one up in Scotland, because it's quite difficult. It's not difficult, but it's a challenge to get people from Scotland and the north of England to travel down to London to go to a conference. I mean, in global terms, it's not that big a different distance, but it's still a challenge mentally to get people to make that leap. And it's cost prohibitive and so on. And so we decided to run a conference up here in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and then the pandemic hit, so we had to move it online. And once we moved it online, of course, it's sort of become massive as an online conference, and people really respond to it as an online conference. But the main reason for doing it as ourselves, we do it as part-time, because we have BA jobs ourselves. We run it with a couple of other directors, is as part of kind of give back to our community. So we said up front that we're both BA nerds, and we just bring together sort of speakers who have something to say, and we just hook them up with a number of, well, several hundred BAs who want to hear about these topics that we present to people. And this year, the focus actually is on development and careers and leadership, with a few other interesting things thrown in. Like this year, we're focusing on future BAs and what the topics of the future might be, like cybersecurity and AI and intelligent automation. So things like that. So that's kind of how we came about. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Julia.
Yeah, I'd like to give a big shout out to our fellow directors. So it's David Strachan and Gavin Ross as well. So it's the four of us who work together, and we've got a little group of volunteers that are very kindly giving up their time. But like Linda says, that the key thing is that we all have full-time day jobs. So this is all very much done in our spare time. So it is a labour of love. I suppose we often joke about the elephant in the room. Just because we've got the word business in our title, it doesn't mean to say we know anything about how to put on a conference. So there's been a lot of learning over the years, but we're now into our third year, so things are getting a little bit easier. And if we're allowed to give a little plug, this year's is on 27th of April, which is this Thursday. So if anybody would still like to buy tickets, please do have a look at our website. It's www.balife.co.uk. But if anybody who is not from the UK, please try and buy your tickets before 6 p.m. UK time, just because that gives us, as I say, we're doing this in our spare time and evenings and early mornings. That will give us time to process everything to make sure that you can attend on Thursday. But like Linda said, I think what I get out of it is it's the networking, it's the opportunity, like speaking to yourself, ML, would never have dreamed that we'd be talking to somebody in Canada. We've got delegates from all over the place. We've got some fantastic speakers. And that was another sort of real premise that we wanted to promote for BA Life. It's not just the delegates coming from Scotland and the north of England. We want our speakers to come from the local area as well. So they're not necessarily people that you will have ever heard of. They're not out there on the conference circuit. It's an opportunity for them to spread their wings and maybe get known and just share their passion for their particular areas of knowledge and things like that. So we've got some brilliant companies being represented, some speakers you will have heard of as well. So we feel we're very proud. We think every year we've got such a good mix of speakers and topics, and that's certainly borne up by the feedback that we get from our delegates. So we do get a big buzz back, I'd say, and it is our way of giving back to the BA community as well.
That's excellent. I have put the URL for that up for the folks who are interested. And I do see the comments coming in, and we will get to those in 1 second. I'd like to just ask you one more question based on your experience. So far we've talked about people skills, and I think we all agree that people skills are critical. I have had to develop my own people skills over time because I'm much more technically oriented, but that's a skill that I've had to build over the course of my career because it's so fundamental. We've talked about technical skills a little bit. The third category of knowledge or skills that I tend to think about has to do with domain knowledge and understanding really the domain area. I wonder if you have any perspectives to share on, in your own careers, whether domain knowledge has been important or whether you've chosen to specialize or whether you really kind of deprioritize that in your own careers.
So sometimes I'm seen as a bit controversial on this because I don't really think that you need domain knowledge necessarily, because one big thing is that when you're a BA, I'm a contractor as well, so I move around companies quite a lot. But when you're a BA, one of the big things that you have to do, it's your job to go in and interrogate people, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, is to ask questions of people about their business. It's your role to get that information out of them. So your job is not to be the subject matter expert. You're asking people what their business is about. And invariably, it's much easier to do that if you can play dumb and just ask some questions. You know, hey, I need to find out about your model for registering land because I know nothing. And if you can honestly say that, then they're going to give you a lot more detail because you're being genuinely dumb about that process or that bit of industry. But the difficulty that I find as a contractor is that when you're looking for work in those areas, businesses trying to employ BAs will often say, oh, well, they don't have any knowledge of the industry. But you don't really need that because your job is not to be the subject matter expert. Your job is to be a BA. Now, I have moved around in finance, which covers life and pensions and banking, and not had any issues. I can still perform my role. I've moved from banking to the public sector, which for us means into local government. I've moved from life and pensions, and I use land registry because I've moved into land registration in the UK, and I've also worked in manufacturing. So I've moved around a whole different environments, and I think Julia's done the same. So it's never really been an issue to not be the subject matter expert. So I don't really think it's that much of a challenge.
I completely agree with everything that you say. I really don't advocate it as being that important at all. It's definitely something, it goes back to this whole learning aspect. You will pick it up, and maybe by the end of the project you might be a bit of a subject matter expert, but you certainly don't have to be that to start. And I remember years ago, and I've used it so many times, there was an IIBA event that we went to, and the theme of the talk was about a BA having a toolkit, just like you would expect a plumber to come and fix your leaky roof with his own toolkit. You wouldn't expect him to come with anything else apart from that. And I think I've used that so many times to new BAs to basically say that is our domain knowledge. We are the experts in our field. And that's why I know people like, well, the British Computer Society and IIBA, they're really pushing for accreditation a lot more in that kind of professional space to be recognised that we bring our own knowledge and skills, and that is what will help them ultimately and improve the customer journeys and things like that as well.
That's interesting. We had a comment from a user who says, what a great perspective for those who are hesitant to apply for work where they may lack experience. You are not expected to be a subject matter expert. You will learn what you need to know. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's completely. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Linda.
No, I totally agree. In fact, flipping that one step further, it sometimes has advantages because if you think you know a little bit about the industry or the business, then you make assumptions. You can't help it because you're a human being. We all make assumptions. So if you go into a stakeholder meeting and you've worked in life and pensions and you think you understand a claim system, then you're naturally going to go in there with your own bias. And one of the big things you have to learn is to leave your bias, your personal bias, at the door and not take that with you into a meeting. But that's quite difficult to do. But if you don't know the subject area at all, you don't have to struggle with that. You just can leave it at the door because you don't have that knowledge. So in many ways, it's much easier to do that if you don't have the subject matter knowledge.
Oh, I totally agree with that. There's a phrase in Scotland, you'd say you're playing the daft lassie. There's no such thing as a stupid question, and that is it. But you make friends with the people that you need to get the answers from. Take them for a coffee, get them to scribble something on a piece of paper. Can you explain how that system operates? What's that downstream system? What do you really do if you don't follow the process? These are all just open questions, and it goes back to, again, having that key toolkit. You're there to elicit requirements, and it's such a key word that gets omitted from a language. Everybody talks about gathering requirements, but I think eliciting, it's just so much more graphic. You're there to tease those little bits of information out from the stakeholders instead.
Yeah.
So that, again, that goes back to, that's your skill you're bringing to the company. You will learn how everything works.
That is so interesting, because the word gathering requirements has bothered me my entire career, because it implies that we're really just kind of, it's a serene environment where we're just going out and picking berries at will, where I think it's a little bit more like you said, it's eliciting, you're teasing it out. I sometimes, for some of my own client work that I've done, the more difficult client engagements that I've been on, it has felt a little bit like coal mining at times. But it is, because you really have to sometimes you get down and dirty to get to the details that you actually need. But I think that's an excellent point to make. In my own career, I think we have a great perspective on this, because we have, all three of us, I believe, are work on contract basis, which means that we go from client to client to client, which means we're changing domains regularly. So I myself started my career in government, then I moved into the nuclear industry, then I moved into insurance, then mutual funds, and I mean, I've been everywhere. But the one thing that I have taken with me is my core business analysis skills and knowledge, the tool set, as you mentioned, Julia. That tool set goes around with me everywhere I go. My experience has been that some clients are more patient than others. Now, as if you're a permanent employee and you are working in an organization, I think that's probably a really great place to start, because you'll have more patient folks working with you to help you learn. As a consultant or a contractor, have you experienced those types of difficult clients that may be a little bit shorter on patience than others?
So I've worked both sides. I've worked for companies, and then the last 12 or so years as a contractor. And I think there's been a shift, if I'm honest, in the attitude towards contractors. Because I remember when I wasn't a contractor, it being quite, contractors being treated like not part of the community, not part of the company, as a so not an employee, and they were somehow treated slightly different, not part of the team, if I'm honest. But my experience being on the other side as a contractor in all of the companies that I've worked at is that we've always been treated as part of the team. So I think from that there's been a kind of shift, but along with that has come different ways of working. So with that has come sort of agile techniques where you get embedded in much more as part of an agile team, for example. So I think that maybe has instigated much more of a change where you're much more integrated in the team itself. So I don't know, that's just my perspective. So
that is interesting.
I'd look at it slightly differently as well. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say. I was thinking along the lines of, oh no, blank moment.
That's okay. I think that's interesting, because I find that, I mean, I've had to move into a contracting consulting role a little bit later in my career. So I found that what's worked best for my own career is to take a permanent role up until I build a certain level of confidence. And I think in North America, it's typically expected for you to have a certain amount of experience before you can become a contractor or a consultant. But I think you reach a certain point in your career where you've built up enough skills and confidence to be able to go from one environment to another. And the a lot of the other factors that get involved as a contractor can include, like you mentioned, Linda, is that sometimes you may not be included as part of a group. You may not be seen as part of the organization. You're seen as an outsider. I've experienced issues where I have less than, I want to say, rightfully so. Some folks that hire me tend to expect me to understand their domain sometimes, and when I don't, that is a bit of a surprise to them because they wonder why I've been not knowing what skills I have. They've been wondering why I'm there, where I'm asking them very basic questions. I think that once you reach a certain point in your career, you're way more comfortable dealing with those types of pressures. Whereas if you're trying to become a contractor or a consultant very early on, it can be a little bit more difficult. I don't know what your take is on that.
Yes, possibly they expect you to know more. I mean, if I'm brutally honest, I kind of find the other extreme. Because of the experiences I've had, I'm always wanting to move quite fast and just get on with it. And I find companies sort of like, whoa, we don't really move that quickly. So I'm sort of being drawn back a bit and getting slowed down. So but I think generally, from what I remember from when I was permanently employed in a lot of companies, the shift towards contract is very much different. It's a different attitude. There's no longer a them and us. It's much more everyone's the same team. We're all working together to just get the job done. And maybe that's just how it is over here. I don't know. Maybe there's a sort of different kind of style or attitude towards people.
I've remembered what I was going to say, and it was that I don't think there is such a thing as a them and us. I think if you're starting any kind of new project or new company, as humans, we've got our own standards that we want to reach, and we might say to ourselves, oh, I must know about everything about this project within 2 months or 3 months or something like that. And we try and build our own levels that you're probably going to fail at anyway. And I always say to people, you're not really going to feel comfortable in your role. Maybe about 6 months in, you really got to give yourself much longer than you might originally think. And even then, you're still learning. It doesn't stop. You can't say that by X amount of time, I'm going to know everything, because that just isn't the case. Even the best SME in the world probably doesn't know everything. So it's still constantly evolving as well. But yeah, I don't think it matters. You still have to prove yourself, whether you're a contractor or whether you are a permanent member of staff. But don't set yourself up to fail. Give yourself time. But yeah, like Linda says, every company is different, and it does depend on that pace of the project or that pace of the company, what's going to restrict you from progressing faster, maybe.
That's so interesting. And I mean, I have my own, I think you're probably right, Julia, because part of what I do in my own contracting work is that I give myself a certain grace period, right? So the way I tend to think every time I start a new client engagement in a new domain is I say, okay, I have 4 to 6 weeks to ask what I like to call dumb questions. And so what I do is I put a lot of pressure on myself to say that I have to make sure I get all of those questions out now so that I am up to speed and I can start to kind of deliver a little bit more value at a higher level. And so I think you are right. I am hard on myself, but I do kind of enjoy actually pushing myself a little bit hard that way. Maybe it's not for everybody, possibly, but I think you're right. Even on that specific client engagement that I'm thinking about, there were concepts that they introduced to me on day one that I did not understand clearly until 6 months in. And it took a long time for some of those things to sink in. So I think this is excellent. I'm going to go to the comments. to see what some of the folks have to say here. There's a comment here that says some companies expect to have a minimum experience on domain to shortlist the resume. This is true. On certain contracts or certain job postings, you'll see an explicit requirement for domain knowledge. And in those cases, it becomes mandatory. So they'll say, hey, you should have X amount of years working in HR business analysis, for example. That may happen. But in those kinds of examples, I think a lot of those job postings will make that clear for you. Now, there are types of organizations out there I found that cannot expect people to have any of their domain knowledge because they're so specialized. So, for example, I work with the University of Toronto on a client engagement, and they were looking specifically for business analysis skills, and they were willing to actually teach a person because there are very few analysts out there who specialize in the university environment. It's a very specific type of an environment. So maybe that's something that folks can also kind of take away with them. The message here is that there's a ton of variety, it seems like. From your experiences and my experience here, I think we have a lot of different variety. The message that I like to send out to most analysts out there is that there is space for you if you have domain knowledge or if you don't. And there's such a huge variety of types of BA jobs out there that I think there is a place for almost everyone, is the way that I kind of think about it. Can
I just answer that comment as well?
Sure.
If somebody is thinking about applying for a job and that's what it says on the job description, try not to deselect yourself from the process before you've even applied. Still apply for it, but maybe in your cover letter for the resume, you need to maybe mention more about the transferable experience. Because again, link it back to the BA skills that you can bring to the table instead. And you might be surprised that once they read that, they'll actually go, do you know what? Yeah, I can see you're going to be able to learn the domain. You've proven from your letter or your past experience that you can learn on the job. And that's going to be more important than coming already with that knowledge.
I agree with Julia, because I think particularly with jobs, and over here you get a lot of jobs coming out from agencies, and the job description quite often has been built up by the agent, and they don't really understand, and neither does HR really, what a BA does. They don't understand. They automatically go for the subject matter expert area. They don't fundamentally understand that it's a BA's role to ask questions and understand what that business area is all about. They don't understand the transferable skills. So they're writing a job description for a role that they don't understand.
That is so important, because the business analyst role, I think, is hard enough for new practitioners to understand. To try to expect a recruiter or an HR person who is really probably recruiting across the entire company to understand this role specifically, I think is maybe it creates another really kind of obstacle for us to be able to get our way in. We have a ton of questions, but I do want to be respectful of your time. I know you've graciously donated an hour of your time, and we're getting close to that point now. I'll take one more comment, and there are a lot of comments coming from our YouTube channel that are very specifically related to how a person can get into a role. I would say that I can address these comments in a separate live session, because they're very specific to that situation. So Sumit, I do see your comment, and this is something that we can address in a future live session. Hi, Mel and Julia. For me, it makes most sense to apply for a BA at RBC because I already have 4-year track record there. Okay, RBC it's either, I mean, RBC stands for the Royal Bank of Canada. I think RDS is the Royal Bank of Scotland. Their logos are very, very similar. Let's just say. But yeah, I mean, if you already have experience at an organization, I would say absolutely go for it. I will put a pause there, and I'll encourage the attendees to check out the BA Live conference that's starting in a few days that that our hosts have put so much work into. I do appreciate both of you taking this hour out of your busy day. I know you're working a full day and coming on to this afterwards, so I do truly appreciate you both coming on here.
Thank you for
Thank you for
having
having
us.
us.
Yeah.
Very much so. I will be leaving links to both Julia and Linda's profiles in the comments in the chat. And again, the URL for the BA Live conference is up there. Please check it out. For the folks that have asked questions, I am going to be going through on LinkedIn and on YouTube after this show to answer some of your questions in more detail. Unfortunately, our hour did not allow us to address all of those questions for now. But thank you both. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to do this again. I have a ton of follow-up questions for both of you, so I'll park those for the next one.
It's
Great.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to do it again. So
Excellent. 2 thumbs up to that. I will see you both.
Lovely.